Hey Rebels, my name is Matthew Barton. Welcome to the Rebellion Brewing Podcast. The snow is finally melting, which means if you're like me, you're stocking up on charcoal and all your grilling essentials. Today, I'm sitting down with Pitmaster Rob Reinhardt from Prairie Smoke and Spice to talk all things barbecue. So let's get into it. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me in, Matthew. Thrilled to talk about barbecue. My wife would be the first to tell you if I'm talking to you and your listeners, I'm not boring her with barbecue anymore. So we're all happy.
That sounds exactly like my wife. Sick of hearing me talk about beer.
Yeah.
How's it going in general?
Really good. Really good. Starting to see some light at the end of this tunnel. And you're right about the weather because, man, that sun opens up and snow starts melting. People start grilling. So my inbox sees more and more messages these days.
Have you pulled out or do you even put away your grills? Does the snow even matter to you?
Snow doesn't make a big difference for me. I mean, Regina got a lot of snow this year, so there was constant digging. There are still some that are going to be buried for another month, I'm sure, but the ones I use regularly are good to go.
How has the last year been for Prairie Smoke? I've seen you guys doing a lot of events, but I also know people have been really impacted by COVID, like businesses.
Yeah, true enough. I mean, obviously, Prairie Smoke and Spice, we thrive on large events, festivals, catering jobs. And that's been pretty slow the last couple of years, of course. Even 2020 and 21, there was a lot of smaller parties, 30 to 50 people, and we're grateful for that. And we had a couple of great years with the food truck. Again, we're fortunate we had that to fall back on. But now we're really starting to see the big inquiries come through. We catered a party for 700 people just last week, and people were really excited to have the opportunity to get together again.
I've been trying to spend a lot of time telling people that they can order your stuff online and how easy it is for my family to just have a ready-made meal with some really reliably cooked meat. And today for lunch, I had chicken that I used your chicken rub on. And 2 days ago, I had the steak rub on some steak. And then the time before that, I had burgers. It was 4 days in a row. I've had your food or your products for supper. And it's just, I've been trying to get that word out to people.
Yeah, and we really appreciate that. And the funny thing about the barbecue rubs and sauce and so on, that business has exploded over the last 2 years. So it's made me appreciate it so much more. And I spend a lot of time on social media and the people that are using our products. I try to express my gratitude for that all the time. And the vacuum sealed frozen meats, they were huge for us back in 2021 when people were at home looking for a quick, reliable meal. You can't necessarily do hot food takeout every night. You want something convenient at home. And that vacuum sealed meat does it for a lot of people.
I gotta say, I kind of took the steak rub, like the steak shake.
Yeah.
I took it for granted until I ran out. And then I used something else, just like whatever we had laying around. And I was like, I got to get on the website. And my wife's like, get on that real quick.
Oh, well, thank you.
Credit card is
We're pretty proud of that one.
But our guys were talking about how they're putting it on popcorn.
Yeah, it's a pretty versatile seasoning, right? And there's a little bit of beef flavoring in that rub. And we're seeing the most feedback from people using it on vegetables and potatoes. Somebody a couple weeks ago used it as a rimmer on a Caesar, and I'm impressed with people's creativity with that one.
When you're coming into this year, it sounds like you're saying big groups coming. What do you think's going to happen?
I mean, nobody knows for sure, but our eye is on our festival business. 2019, that was our bread and butter, and events like the Calgary Stampede, Queen City Rib Fest is in the planning mode right now, and there should be 4 full-scale Rib Fests in Saskatchewan this year. And we branch out to other provinces as well. So that's looking promising. Again, food truck season should be here by now. Last year we were on the road this week. but we're still buried behind some snow, so the food truck's still a few weeks away. But we're optimistic and fingers crossed that it's going to be a better summer on the road.
One thing I've noticed that you have been doing really, really well and kind of pantsing everybody else is social media. It feels like you really wrapped your head around it.
I knew 5 years ago how powerful it was. I knew 10 years ago how powerful it was. I launched my catering business in 2009 by targeted advertising on Facebook. And, it's not just Facebook anymore, but with a little bit of downtime, I had some time to, sharpen my video capture skills and video editing skills, and putting more effort into short form educational tutorial style videos, and doing some fun, silly, ridiculous content as well. And TikTok's been a great outlet for that.
Let's process the whole bone-in ribeye roast. Save ourselves a pile of money in the process. Number one, we'll move the ribeye roast from that cryovac package. This was a hell of a deal I got after New Year's. First of all, we're going to point out that 7-bone section of the bottom of the roast.
And it's absolutely necessary this day and age because these tools are free and they're powerful, and it's an amazing way to connect with not just people we already have a relationship with, but finding new people to connect with. It's been awesome.
I was trying to explain to my buddy, you got to check out Rob's tutorial on TikTok. And he goes, I'm not even on TikTok. I'm like, I don't care. Just go get TikTok. And he's sharing real knowledge. He's sharing actual practical tools and tips. Was that something you planned in advance, or was it something you just stumbled backwards into?
Like any adult our age, I kind of looked at TikTok with some suspicion. And you hear people like Gary Vaynerchuk years ago emphasizing and hammering the idea that all businesses should be on this platform, just like Instagram or Facebook. And so I reluctantly checked it out and downloaded it, and 8 hours later realized how much time I had invested just being a consumer of the content in this app. So I got in there, put up some silly, stupid little videos, and just kind of watched how they performed and started drawing people in. And the more time I invested on that, I really started to see payback for my time invested, right? Not just in followers, which are kind of meaningless on their own, but actual customers for my business. We did a kind of a behind the scenes look at one of our catering jobs last November, December. Stitched it together. It might have been 13 or 15 short little clips, but made a story out of it. Launched that, and I think that little video is up to 150,000 views. And there's been at least a half a dozen Saskatchewan wedding couples that have reached out to me saying, we found you on TikTok, we want you to cater our wedding. How incredible is that? This is something that took some time to figure out. Didn't cost me anything to produce, and away we go.
That's awesome.
So it's been worth the effort.
I kind of feel like personal word of mouth or self-discovery really lends to kind of building a true audience,
Yeah, absolutely. You can't just be posting stuff and closing your app and walking away. There is some interaction required in order to make the best of it.
One of the things I wanted to bug you about today was drinking some beer. Because of COVID, I haven't really been sitting down with people in person. I've had to do a lot of Zoom calls, so I was really excited to sit down with you and crack what might be one of the first beers I've had in months on the show.
That's a special occasion.
So today we've got 9 Mile Legacy's beer called The Ticket. It's a Belgian blonde, and it's 4.7% ABV.
Looking forward to trying it.
Okay, let's give her. Cheers.
Cheers.
Have you had this one before?
No, I haven't. I've had 9 Miles product before, and I've always been delicious. Yeah, this is good.
Part of the reason I picked this beer is I had a German 3-course meal, beer and food and dessert pairing. And my friend said, we're going to do the wine. They'll cook the food. But Matt, you need to bring the beer. So I said, okay, I'm going to figure out these courses. I'm going to figure out these beers. And this was one of the beers I brought. And it was a hit. Everybody was digging on it. And I said, this is great for burgers, fries, steak, barbecue, pork, this is the kind of beer that fits in that genre. And I felt it would be appropriate to bring to you today for the show.
Yeah, I think it'd be good. It would pair along with barbecue really quite well. It's light, but it's not as light as most craft Pilsner style, like Rebellion's beer, for example. It's got a little more body, a little more sweetness. I can taste the wheat component there, a little more yeast. So it's a little stronger than just your standard light blonde ale.
I want to say maybe it's like that Belgian spice note from the yeast that gives that little complexity. I kind of just feel I want to have some French fries with this one.
Yeah, I can go along with that.
When we're talking about pairing food and drink, it's kind of a little bit of an art, a little bit of a science. But when I think of barbecue, I think of more of a harder science. You know, you want your right temperatures, you want your times to be a little bit better. But then another part of me goes, well, it also is just experience and knowing.
Right.
So I wanted to kind of pick your brain and find out what toys and techniques are you kind of playing with right now?
Well, as far as techniques go, there's a couple I've tried over the winter. One is a steak grilling method that I have never done before, referred to online as just keep flipping. My approach to grilling a steak has always been start as hot a fire as you can get, whether it's charcoal or your gas grill. Throw your steak on there and leave it long enough to get a good crust, a good sear, and then flip it. Continue that on the other side and remove your steak. This new method involves throwing that steak on a really hot grill and flipping it every 30 seconds. We're going to close the lid, check back, flip it again. And remarkably, I was always afraid that the steak would get overcooked before it would get a good sear on it. But remarkably, you get a very good sear on both sides without overcooking the center of the steak. I'm surprised by how well it's worked.
What were you seeing or what were you observing when you're trying this method?
I was just surprised that it worked. I mean, normally I don't want to touch a steak because I'm assuming that once that searing process begins, that Maillard reaction, I want it to continue until it's 100% complete. And I was always afraid that once I flipped the steak over, the surface would cool. And the longer it would take for that sear to happen, the more overcooked the center of my steak would get. And I honestly found that I had to try it to prove it to myself that it actually worked. And now I'm happy with the technique.
How long for every... So it's every 30 seconds, but for like 3 minutes, 5 minutes? Are you looking for thickness or doneness?
It depends on thickness and doneness. And this is where the science comes into it because, you know, I've grilled thousands of steaks in my life, and I still will not spend $20 on a steak and cook it without a digital temperature probe, right? A digital instant read thermometer. There's brands out there that I recommend, from affordable to expensive, and that little thermometer makes me a better cook, especially when you're having people over, right? You've got 4 or 5 guests over and you've bought some good quality steaks. You're into this meal for $100 already. And that's for a raw steak that you're cooking yourself. So I want to make sure that every one of those steaks is grilled to perfection. If somebody wants rare, they're going to get rare. If somebody wants medium well, they're going to get medium well. If somebody wants well done, well, we're not even going to go there.
Politely ask them to leave.
Yeah. That good quality digital instant read thermometer makes the difference. So.
I was about to say to you, I see you doing a lot of myth busting on your social media, and I'm kind of cautious because when I'm spending $20 to $50 on meat, I am concerned about wasting my money, about ruining that piece of meat and wasting my time. And then I'm stuck going off to go get a fast food burger because I destroyed something. Do you have a very persistent myth you're just fighting against, or maybe banging your head on the wall and people should know, hey, this is a common misconception?
There's a number of them. I think the one that bugs me the most is the idea that you should sear a large roast before you finish cooking it. Something like a prime rib, for example, or even a thicker, medium-sized roast like a sirloin cap or a tri-tip. You know, conventional technique would be to sear this piece of meat in a very hot oven or a very hot grill, and then turn down the temperatures and finish cooking it with indirect heat. The drawback with that method is that you end up with a large amount of meat that ends up overcooked. because meat cooks with thermal energy traveling from the outside of the roast down to the inside. And if that happens quickly, you end up with the outer, half-inch or 1-inch layer of meat that ends up overcooked, well done. And you've lost moisture, you've lost flavor at that point. So the idea that you need to sear that meat at the beginning to seal in the juices has been disproven by science. So I teach people the reverse sear technique, which involves bringing that meat up to an internal temperature rather slowly. We'll start it off, if it's a grill or smoker, we're cooking at 225 to 250 Fahrenheit. And we're slowly bringing up the internal temperature of that meat. So you end up with meat that's more evenly cooked from top to the bottom. We're still going to sear it. That introduces a lot of flavor. We're just doing that at the end of the cooking process. So that searing meat before cooking is one that drives me nuts, for sure.
So you're pushing back what you referred to as the Maillard reaction?
Yeah, we're going to do it at the end of the cooking process instead of at the beginning.
One of the ones I was looking at was the guy was saying it didn't matter if you left the meat out on the counter to rest versus straight out of the fridge and just threw it on the grill.
This idea that you have to let meat come up to room temperature. And if you physically did that with a large cut of beef, you'd be looking at 8 or 10 hours minimum. And now we're introducing food safety risks to our food. Even something like a steak is going to take hours on the counter to come to room temperature, and it's completely pointless. Temperature-wise, right, that if we're talking Fahrenheit, that refrigerator temperature is 32 Fahrenheit. We might bring it up to 70 Fahrenheit, being room temperature. And we're going to throw that on a 700-degree grill. This doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I'll put it that way.
When I'm watching these guys, and they're often taking syringes, and they're putting the syringes into the meat and injecting flavor juices or spices or something. What's going on? And is that real, or is that kind of phony baloney theory?
Yeah, injecting is a legitimate way to add flavor to meat, especially with leaner cuts, something like a turkey or a pork loin. The meats don't have that internal fat marbling to keep them moist through the cooking process. So injecting adds moisture and can add flavor as well. In my world, I have the background in competition barbecue, and injecting is a critical component of success in that world too.
Why is that?
Something like a brisket, pork butt, or even ribs people are injecting. Because judges in the competition world are evaluating every bite on flavor, of course, but also texture and moisture content. So if I want them taking a bite of my brisket, I want that brisket to have like a strong, natural, beefy flavor, but I want it to have some moisture. So injections in that world contain other ingredients to enhance the flavor, like a little bit of MSG perhaps. They contain an ingredient called sodium phosphate. And that's an ingredient, it's a natural form powder that, once it's injected with meat, forms a chemical reaction. And it allows that meat and the cells within the meat to retain its own natural juice a little bit easier. So there's a couple of different perspectives on that for sure.
Is it cheating, or is it just really smart science?
It's
going
smart
on?
science. Yeah. Competition barbecue is evaluated by certified barbecue judges who are regular Joes off the street that have taken a judging class, basically. So you'll get a scientist next to a concrete worker, next to a lawyer, and they share that common barn of loving barbecue. And as it turns out, that slice of society scores well with meats that have been injected with these products. So, as long as the target kind of stays in one position, it gives competition cooks a target. And if that, if those tastes change, competition cooks have to adapt.
I know you've been traveling across the States, or you were recently. You were posting videos of the sausage snap.
Yeah.
And I was like, what's going on there? That looks so tasty.
So, yeah, we, my family ends up in San Antonio every February for a football tournament, a youth football tournament. There's a program in Saskatchewan called Sask Selects, and we've been a part of that for a number of years. And within 2-3 hours of San Antonio, you have 5 of the top 10 barbecue restaurants in Texas. And that town in particular where I filmed that snapping sausage, town is called Lockhart. And there's 3 world-class old-school barbecue joints with a lot of history, and Central Texas sausage is a core element of these joints. So these sausages are largely beef. They're largely contained of brisket trimmings, scrap meat that comes out of the kitchen, but they're ground coarsely and they're ground with a fair amount of fat. And they're cooked over an open hardwood fire. So that casing on there, you break one of those sausages in half and it just launches juice into the air. So I had the opportunity that day with my daughter, had her snap one of those. I'm like, watch, I'm going to video this. And sure enough, 10 minutes later, it's on TikTok. A lot of fun.
The way Mark talks about going to Texas for barbecue, it's a totally different vibe than here. Like people, they're just like not screwing around.
Texas takes barbecue very, very seriously. There's no question about it. And for anybody interested in traveling, it's really remarkable how there's been two separate paths, two separate worlds of restaurant barbecue in Texas. And going back 10 years, a town like Lockhart was the global headquarters for barbecue. And Texas, the state itself, has named this town the barbecue capital of Texas. But within the last 5 or 10 years, the scene's really changed. There's a lot of young cooks that have come on the scene. They're cooking prime grade meat. They're cooking it on expensive 1,000-gallon offset smokers. I mean, to buy these smokers right now down there, most manufacturers are a year down the pipeline for orders, and people are paying $10,000 to $20,000 for these offset converted propane tank pits.
Like commercial
users
they're not, or private users?
Commercial users.
Okay.
Yeah, for the most part. But the style of barbecue is completely been elevated. There's a Texas Monthly is a magazine that's published in Texas. Every 5 years they do an intensive study and they launch what's known as the Texas Monthly Top 50, which is a ranking of the top 50 joints in Texas. And it's a thoroughly researched article when it's published, and it's every barbecue joint's dream to be on this list somewhere. And it's really remarkable. The list came out several months ago, again, for the 5-year period. And a lot of these joints that have been around for generations have been completely pushed off the list because the quality that's coming out of these younger pitmasters, their restaurants are popping up in downtown San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, and $1 million build-outs and prices on the menu to match. But it's quite an interesting experience tasting the food in some of these newer joints that have opened up. Salt and pepper brisket that's been cooked, meticulously cooked and babysat for 12 or 14 hours. Quality of food I've never been able to replicate myself, and I've tried. Let's put it that way. But we start with a very good product and follow a pretty tight procedure and make adjustments for temperature outside and humidity. And the pitmasters that are running these joints now have changed the definition of barbecue in Texas completely. It's really crazy.
Hold up. They're measuring the ambient humidity?
Yeah, I've seen logs on the wall, and procedures get adjusted depending on the humidity in the air.
Really?
It becomes more than an art form, right? Because when you're a pitmaster that's figuring this out on your own, you're not a pitmaster that's working 24 hours a day. So you have to establish procedures, and you have to establish procedures that account for different environmental conditions. So it's taken science to a whole new level when it comes to cooking this stuff.
I was talking to a chef last week who was on Wall of Chefs on the Food Network.
Yeah.
And he was saying his signature dish, he went to make it, but he was working on the Food Network equipment, and he just destroyed his meat because he wasn't used to their equipment. It was like commercial grade, really, really fast, cooks hot, whereas at home, he's just working on his own stuff, smaller, not commercial grade, and he failed to account for that variable. So now you're saying these guys are talking about humidity and the next level stuff. And it's strange how those two pieces connect, but that it sounds like you're saying that's the difference between going to the next level.
Going to the next level, right? And the definition of excellent barbecue, and even in a place like Texas, has really changed in the last 10 years.
Who's blowing your mind? Who do you recall from Texas? Like, say somebody's thinking, I'm gonna go down to Texas.
Oh boy. Well, I did my research before the trip. I didn't hit as many of these places as I wanted to. But we actually drove down from Saskatchewan this time. We've always flown before, but this time we didn't want the stress of air travel. So we drove down, got to hit a place outside Kansas City that I hadn't been to before, and Oklahoma City that I hadn't been to before. So Great to try those places out. But the ones that really stand out from this last trip to Texas, one in San Antonio called 2M Smokehouse. It's hit this top 10 list in years past. They've been open for 6 or 7 years, but just a little small joint. It's a good 15-minute drive from downtown. It's a relatively small shack, and they're producing literally the best brisket I've ever eaten in my life. The beef they're bringing in there is a Kaushi, which is it's not quite Wagyu, but it's well above prime grade. So it's a small producer, Japanese-influenced beef, very well marbled. $40 a pound if you order it by the pound. The price is up there. And their dessert program is phenomenal too. The husband and wife that own the place, when he was a pitmaster, he started cooking. He opened the restaurant. He developed these procedures, and his wife wanted to come along for the ride, so she enrolled herself in pastry school. And had an opportunity to try one of her desserts at the San Antonio Livestock Rodeo a month earlier, and absolutely phenomenal flavor and texture. So the dessert program in this restaurant is notable as well. And what really stood out in my mind after eating that phenomenal brisket, they have an Ube Cheesecake.
What the hell is that?
Ube is, it's a South American tuber, somewhat in the sweet potato family, I believe. And it's almost as purple as a beet. So this cheesecake was a bright, rich lavender color, light whipped cream frosting on top, and a little gold flake dusted for special effect. And flavors I've never tasted before, but it sure made an awesome dessert.
Okay, I'm going to tell my audience to go get a pen and a pad of paper and write the name of this place down. Let's get that name down.
2M Smokehouse.
2M Smokehouse.
Yeah.
Oh, man. My mouth's watering.
Yeah.
I've already eaten lunch.
If any of your listeners are traveling to Texas, Nashville, Kansas City, and they're looking for recommendations, we have some good ideas for you.
What's next for Rob Reinhardt and Prairie Smoke and Spice?
Well, I'm going to continue to spend a lot of time online. I get inspired by other cooks kicking ass on social media. Even within Canada, there's a number of cooks that are doing a phenomenal job and cooking every day with the kind of energy I had when I was 20 years old, And I'm not grilling outside every day anymore, especially during the winter. But I draw a lot of inspiration from there. So if you're on Instagram, TikTok, there's a lot of good cooks out there. Hopefully you come across their content, and that keeps me going all the time. As far as this year goes, just kind of planning, and every week that passes, I guess the business conditions become a little more transparent, what we can expect for the summer. So every week we get a little more excited about what's down the horizon.
I feel like this summer is going to be really kick-ass for you.
I have a feeling it will too.
Rob, thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
Rebels, thanks for listening today. If you have any questions or comments about this episode, be sure to join us on our brand new Facebook group page, The Rebellion Brewing Podcast. I'm going to include links to all things Prairie Smoke and Spice so you can find them online, including TikTok. I'm also proud to let you know that we're members of the Saskatchewan Podcast Network, a one-stop shop for tons of locally produced shows from across our province. You can find them at saskpodcastnetwork.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Untappd so you don't miss out on the latest in Sask craft beer news. Thank you for joining the Rebellion.